I'm super excited and grateful to be here with you, Julia, for a conversation, and I'm just really looking forward to it. And yeah, grateful for your sharing. So,
Thanks for having me,
um,
Tali. I'm excited to talk with you.
so if we can start, just I'd love to hear a little bit about the kind of the story that brought you here to this intersection. What were the kind of sparks for you in your relationship to the living world and animals and to spirituality and religion? Yeah.
Yeah. So I kind of went a unique path, maybe unorthodox towards what I do now. And so I can kind of tell you the ending and then how I got here. So I work for an organization called Compassion in World Farming. We're a global animal welfare organization specifically dedicated to improving the lives of the billions of animals raised for food in our food system. So I tend to see a lot of people that come to this path more with the animal science background or environmental stewardship, and all of that is important. For me, though, it was more of a change of heart and really thinking about how can we tell the story and make people care about this issue to really evoke change. So I grew up in Michigan. And I was fortunate enough to live kind of in the woods, even though I was in a small town just a few miles away from our downtown, where there was a bustling culture. But I grew up really in 8 acres of the forest, and being able to walk in our woods and pretty much every day or every week and be able to breathe the fresh air, feel that connectivity of being in this environment around all of these trees, and also seeing the animals that were around, whether they were deer or squirrels and even turkeys. And we still have them at my parents' house of this family of turkeys and deer that they go out and feed every day. And one of the first memories that I had, a kind of environmental activism, I think I was maybe 4 to 6 years old, and there was this tree that wasn't flowering for a few years. And so my parents had hired a landscaping company to come out and take it down. And I don't know why I felt convicted to say this, but I came out and I was like screaming and saying, no, don't take it down, don't take it down. And my parents just didn't really understand why I was so concerned about it. And they said, okay, we'll just like put her at bay, calm her down. We won't take down the tree. And sure enough, years after that, it finally started to bloom. And I didn't realize how powerful of that kind of message it would be throughout my narrative of my story and my journey until, of course, after the fact and thinking about it from really the idea of responsibility and stewardship and really caring for those that can't speak up for themselves. So separate from that environment when I grew up, my parents exposed me to riding horses at a petting zoo kind of thing. With one of my birthdays, I think I was 4, and I got hooked. And horses are still part of my life, and that really got me involved with 4-H. And so that exposed me to agriculture and made me start thinking, where does our food come from? And I had really no idea of where our meat, dairy, and eggs come from. I was a typical suburban type diet of meat and potatoes in the Midwest and a glass of milk every day. And that was what we ate, and we didn't really ever talk about it. And it was between agriculture with 4-H exposure and me wanting to pet the pigs and the cows and get more involved. And really, then I started seeing videos and documentaries when I was about 13. And I saw the horrors of how pigs are raised right now in the United States in gestation crates. And I couldn't unsee it. And for me, it wasn't a scientific argument. It wasn't about looking at the cortisol levels of stress within the pigs. It was something that said to me, this is wrong, this is immoral, and this has to change. And so after that, I started thinking, how can I start advocating for these animals that don't have a voice and that people aren't thinking about? And most people now, knowing all of the statistics and the consumer studies, the majority of Americans don't like how, once they learn about this, they're not happy with how the animals are housed and raised, but there's just such a disconnect with the way that these animals are raised on farm and what ends up on the grocery store and what's told in packaging. So I really thought that my vision of how can we create a social movement around helping these animals, that's really where I found my voice and wanted to fill that void in the marketplace. And so in addition to all of this, I had a religious upbringing of Catholicism. And I think that was also really unique, where I was able to take the religious values of the Eucharist and having the body become food is very, very applicable, I guess, to my work now, and thinking about how can we actually create this emotional response to the food that we're eating 3 times a day, and how Christ became the bread of the world. And it's not just on Sundays that Christians can experience this spiritual movement, but if we look at the book of John and how he became the Word, and the Word was at the beginning, and the Word is in all of flesh, thinking about it from an eco-spiritual perspective, if God and if Christ is in all of our food, then there's this ritualistic element of breaking bread with family and friends 2 to 3 times a day, and having that emotional conviction to the food that we eat and consume, and it becomes life for us. So that was really my journey to this. And some of the people that I was the most inspired with was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And this idea of creating a social movement around this really came from religious leaders. And that, I think, is a really opportune experience for people in this religious space to talk to people every Sunday about our food and where it comes from and the implications for animals and humans, whether it's a human rights issue, an environmental justice issue, or an animal welfare issue. So that was kind of my journey to this, and how it came to be. And to me, it makes a lot of sense, but sometimes it takes some time to explain the connection with food and faith and farming. But it really helped me with, especially my training when I was at Michigan State in my undergrad with religious studies, and then at Yale Divinity School, being able to speak the language of these farmers that are working with animals every day has really helped me build that bridge, and be able to meet them where they are and break bread with them on farm and really talk about these issues that are really complex.
Wow, it's an amazing just kind of combination of um, yeah, the like super concrete and the sort of the felt connection piece and the meeting of those two. Um, so yeah, I mean, I'm just kind of there's so much in what you just said I want to follow up on, but I do want to ask kind of you were speaking about Martin Luther King Jr. and the kind of um, the social movement piece here, and I know that a lot of your work surrounds kind of advocacy and um, you know political like political advocacy and movement work, as you were saying. So I'm curious, kind of, to ask a little bit about what you see as the role of activism in your work, and the role of um, sort of the spiritual in activism, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because I think there's a deep sense of the spiritual for me in my activism. And I think when I think about it, there's so many biblical passages around stewardship and responsibility towards the earth and towards God's creatures, that I know a lot of farmers feel this way too, that they're stewards of the earth and stewards of of the land and the animals that they're caring for, and they want to take good care of them. And I think that's something that people are often demonized with activism too. On one side, the people that might be throwing rocks, that are seem to be throwing rocks at the system, and then others that feel like things are being taken away from them and they're not being heard. And so being able to meet people where they are and understand that, and kind of what I was saying around using that common language of stewardship, is a really good way to actually use that passion that I have in a practical manner, and also in a really compassionate and open-minded way. So one example that I have, I went to a poultry farm last year in Northern California, and I was talking to the farmer about why does he care about these chickens and the responsibility that he has, and just trying to get his story more. And he talked about the passage where he mentioned that God cares about the smallest sparrow, and so that means that he cares about every single one of these chickens, and it's my responsibility to take care of them. And so hearing that story, especially about the birds that are raised for food in this country, it's just an astronomical number. There's over 9.5 billion birds raised for meat alone in the United States. And having that kind of mindset, and also the vast scale of our food, especially for chickens that are probably the most abused when it comes to the meat animals raised. It's absolutely horrifying, and it breaks my heart every day. And I think there's also this element, thinking of passages from scripture with Nehemiah, and how he felt this call because his heart was broken over the call of these people that were suffering. And for me, that's really the deep connection, is that I was just praying the other day thinking about this because in these dark moments, I think, man, maybe I should go do something else, or maybe I could do this and that. And there are these moments where I can feel the Holy Spirit talking to me, and I go, okay, fine, you're right, you're right. I can't let go of this because if not me, who else? And I feel this responsibility, and my whole team does at my entire organization, that we are the voice for the voiceless, and we need to speak up for them because if we don't, who will? So we really feel a deep responsibility and a call to action with this kind of work for our food system. And we're in a unique position because we bring in multiple people and different stakeholders into this movement. So it could be worker justice, it could be environmental justice, all of these different avenues of activism. And people really see this problem as kind of a wicked problem, that it's not a simple linear thing that we can fix. We have to come at reforming our food system from so many different angles. We really need to bring more people together to really solve this problem. So I think that for me is the religious connotation and this call to action and really feeling convicted to do this. And it's just that one moment, that first documentary, that first photo that I saw, it opened my mind and my eyes, and I couldn't go back.
Yeah. I mean, you've already started to touch on this, but kind of I'd love to hear sort of specifically in the food system and in agriculture, kind of how you think about the spiritual or ethical obligation to the more than human community. And you've talked about kind of expanding this sense of who is our neighbor. And yeah, would just love to hear about kind of how you think about that in the food system and with the farmers that you work with. And
Mhm.
yeah.
For me, it's really fun thinking about it, and it's kind of this magical cosmic sense of Christianity that if you start thinking differently about who your neighbor is, you really start getting these moments of joy and pleasure and happiness. And so it's like, walking through the park, if you think about trees and how they communicate underground, and if you look at the birds, there's this element of we're all in this together and we all have this connection to the divine that is really powerful. And it does bring a moment of collectivity, that we are neighbors in a sense, and that there's a real comfort to that we're not isolated. And I'm not alone in my house right now, that even my house plants are part of this community. And
Mhm.
I think that is something that brings me a lot of joy. And I think that also that's where I get a lot of comfort in the moments of darkness when I'm faced with really hard hurdles, especially with the food industry, because I've been saying this a lot to my team, that we are the David against the Goliath right now. And right now, it doesn't feel like we're going to be able to make any change, but the good news is David wins in the end. So we continually talk about this. And I think for me and for a lot of us, especially the farmers in this type of work with reforming our food system, the religious stories of good overcoming evil in the end really gives us a lot of hope and a lot of encouragement. And that's something that's needed in this kind of work, because burnout and deprivation can really happen. And having that sense of, you're right, God, you wouldn't have put me in this position if it weren't for something bigger. And I really do feel called for this kind of work, that I didn't choose this. I could have gone a much easier route and not had a target on my back. But the reality is that this is how I feel that God has put me on this earth and what I've been called to do. And I know so many other people feel that way with environmental activism and really any form of social justice, is that we have to stand up for what is right and what is good. And those kinds of religious stories really help us keep going in those moments of darkness.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Um, you spoke about kind of one of the challenges being how kind of the disconnect for the vast majority of us between the food that we find in the supermarket and where that food comes from. And it strikes me that that in a way is that work of like visibilizing the invisible connections is in a way true for so many different kinds of ecological and environmental work. Um, and yeah, I'm just kind of curious to hear a little bit about that piece of sort of making those connections for people, visibilizing the invisible, that piece of your work and challenges in that, places of opening or connection there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting, I tend to be more in the minority of the animal activists where I'm not vegan. And so being able to eat animal products often lowers the shackles a bit sometimes of those in the food industry, that I'm not trying to take anything away from them. I'm just trying to create a more humane and transparent food system. And I think for me, doing that, I personally don't take it lightly when I eat animal products, because there was someone behind this product that their life was gone and to feed me. And so when I talk to people about this and they say, "Oh, I don't want to see photos," or "This is really uncomfortable for me, this is awful," like just tell me what eggs to buy or tell me what meat to buy. And I always say it shouldn't be comfortable. Like you should be uncomfortable with the fact that these animals are in this position, that pigs can't turn around because of this industry focused solely on efficiency and profit. And the reality is, when you get uncomfortable, it shows that there's something wrong. And so that should be potentially a call to action to try and do something different, because that's how I got into this. I didn't like what I saw, so I wanted to do something about it. And I understand that people are at different abilities of being able to afford these products, and also they might not be called in the sense of wanting to become an activist. But I always tell people that you can make a difference every time you go to the grocery store and every time you eat. And we have an opportunity to transform our food system 3 times a day when we eat. So the power of the consumer really is crucial in this. And we see that even in my own lifetime, that there's now organic and natural food sections in the grocery store that wasn't there 20 years ago. And it's because of that consumer demand and people asking questions and demanding different products. And that was also reflected with different legislation across the country too, related to confinement of laying hens and pigs and calves for veal, that there was this demand not only from the consumer side, but in the ballot box. People spoke up about this and they said, we don't want these products in our state anymore. So overwhelmingly, the public really does have control and power over this. It's just sometimes it feels like we don't, because we're so small compared to these mega conglomerates. But the reality is, they're going to grow or produce food in what's going to sell. And so it takes long, but there is that power that if people are uncomfortable with that, it could be a call to action for them. And also to take it more seriously, that when they buy products, they really are influencing the way that food is raised in this nation. So I think for me, it's kind of baby steps with people. And I always encourage them that it's super overwhelming. It's incredibly hard, especially when there aren't products that are more humane on the shelf of what to buy and where to go. So start with one product. If you're convicted for this and called to do something, start with eggs. Just go to cage free or maybe free range. Or ask your butcher, if you eat meat, to source better chicken with slower growing genetics, or crate free pork, or grass fed American beef. Like there's these different, whatever you're really called to do, just pick one item at a
Mhm.
time for maybe the month. And that way it's not overwhelming. And I think a lot of people in the sustainability movement, I've learned this more from the zero waste, but we don't need a small group of people doing everything perfectly. We need more people doing incremental steps along the way. And that's really what's going to make the difference. So
Mm.
I think that's kind of filling that gap with the disconnect of people are uncomfortable or they may not understand the labels, and just pick one product and start thinking critically about it. And then maybe the next month or next quarter, pick something else. And slowly but surely, you'll be able to really start transforming your fridge and what it looks like. And that would have an impact in the grocery store.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a powerful reminder of just like it's not all or nothing, right? Like it's uh kind of where we can um yeah, get closer to and reach in different ways. It doesn't have to be transformation. It can be incremental, as you said.
Absolutely. And I
Yeah.
think we need that too. We really need that kind of incremental change over time. And I think also connecting with local farmers, whether it's at the farmers market or emailing your favorite brands and asking them, how are your farmers paid? How are your animals treated? Asking these kinds of questions, that's when they really do start paying attention to that. And I think that
Mm,
that's something that we may not feel like we have the power to do, but companies listen to that. And especially if they get enough questions around it, they start changing.
yeah.
Mhm.
I'm curious about this. I know that your organization works in a international global context, and so I'm kind of curious to hear about, I mean, all of this, like how through the lens of doing this work on both local and global scales, kind of how that impacts the work, how that plays out.
I'm
Mm.
really fortunate to be in an organization that is on multiple continents. I think we're in 12, if not 14 countries around the world. And we're actually headquartered in the UK, and we were founded by a dairy farmer. And that's something that I really love, that we started as a farmer movement, and we're continually bringing in those allies as we go. And what's really exciting to me is that I have seen policy and corporate change all across the world because of our work. And so we're currently collecting signatures to send to the UK Parliament to eliminate cages for animals. And we're working with the European Commission to eliminate this. And there's these really incredible things that we're seeing, that policy and corporate, public policy and corporate policy can really work to transform things in different ways, and they kind of have to work together. So being able to see that change, we kind of measure our impact based on the estimated animals impacted, and we're over 3 billion that are impacted because of our work around the world. And so it's really heartening to see that we're having a real impact, and to go into grocery store shelves or to go on farm and see the change is really meaningful. And that's something that's unique for us, that we're able to really see the impact of, really in a few years, our work that's being done. So I think for me, it also is very inspiring to hear a story from a farmer in India that converted from cage to cage free. And he's also looking at how to support local farmers economically to make sure that they have a fair wage. Having those stories around the world, it's kind of what I was saying earlier, that it's not just me and my bubble at my home, but there's this global movement that people really care about this, and it shows that this isn't just an American issue or just a European issue, but people around the world want a better food system. They want healthier food. They want more humane food and more sustainable food. And they want to feel good about the food that they're eating. So I think for me, in those darker moments, when we have an uphill battle, hearing those wins and those stories from around the world is really inspiring. And I think that's really important in this kind of work, is to find the really good success wins, to keep you going and showcase that there is momentum. It takes time, and we're very practical with that. We understand that it takes a long time to transform a very complicated food system, but we have to hold on to those powerful stories of success.
Yeah. Does like the does the role of faith and religion as a cultural force kind of shift in as you see this in different in different places across the world? Like how do you see that um, the role of faith being different in different contexts?
Yeah, I definitely do. And part of our strategic plan is actually engaging with global faith leaders in our organization, because we see the power of that sector and those leaders in the space. And I think there's a real opportunity for people that, imagine if every Catholic in the world wanted pasture raised eggs. That's a huge market. And if they felt like it was a religious responsibility for them to do so, that would really change the egg market globally.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
thinking about the power that these consumers have, and that these people of religious conviction, if we think differently, and it kind of goes back to reimagining who our neighbor is, if we think about these animals not for us, but that they are God's animals, they're God's creatures, and that it's our responsibility to make sure that they're cared for in the most humane and respectful way, as it says in religious texts, then there's a real conviction that it's not just about me, that this is about taking care of something that's sacred. So I think there's a real opportunity for that. And that's part of our strategy, actually, is engaging more on the religious leader lens.
Um, so I'm curious kind of to turn just to thinking about um, as you look towards uh, to the work of expanding the work that you all are doing and protecting and improving the um, animal welfare in our food systems and the sustainability of our food systems more generally. What are kind of the big challenges and opportunities that you feel you're faced with right now?
I think what it really comes down to, we tend to have two work streams with our organization, but I like to think of it this way, is that we are trying to raise the baseline of animal welfare for those that are in the most intensively confined environments, so giving them a better life. So that would be things like going from cage to cage-free eggs. But really, our North Star for our food system is a regenerative food system. And so that's returning animals back to the land, having a more localized food system, how food used to be raised 100 years ago, and really thinking more holistically about again, reinventing who our neighbor is. If we think about the mycelium in the soil, and if we think about microbes that are talking to each other and engaging, and then we think about the water that's going into our food system, making sure that that's clean and healthy, all of these different levers and kind of our North Star for our food system is where I would love to see it go. And I think really connecting land, animal, and community within that framework is something that we want to see. The real challenge with this, though, is that we are a society that is focused on linear efficiency. So it's not so much how can we reinvent what profitable means? It's how can we make the most profit in the quickest amount of time? And that has led to a lot of destruction of ecosystems and rural communities and animals and humans as well, especially with health. So I think what we have to do and what we're called to do is think differently about how we measure success and profitability. And instead of thinking just linearly about a product along a supply chain, how can we think more circular and more regenerative? So thinking about the different life cycles of birth, growth, death, and decay, and how that also has religious connotations as well. And for me as a Christian, thinking about that in Christ's story of quite literally the resurrection and being reborn, there's something really powerful about that. And if we were to think about our communities and how we would be supporting our neighborhood, I don't know anyone locally that's growing livestock in my specific town. We always have to go out and source because we're just in a suburban setting. And that's a real problem if something were to happen with our national food shortage, which we experienced during the pandemic and having supply chain disruptions. People were running out of food and they weren't able to find things because of the efficient linear model of industrial agriculture. And it's not sustainable long term. And so we really have to think differently about this. And the good news is that there are leaders in this space doing this and putting animals back on land, seeing the power that we can with working more with nature instead of against it. It has a lot of really spiritual notions for me and how we can rethink our neighbor and redefine how we engage with our ecosystem. It's a really powerful tool. And there's a lot of regenerative farmers that are using livestock to rebuild ecosystems and seeing the benefit of not just financial profitability, but how can we measure success of people coming back and moving to the community? How can we measure human health impacts because the water is cleaner now because we're not using agrochemicals and pesticides and herbicides? There's all of these different elements of how we can measure success in that way that's much more cyclical and really holistic. And I think that that's a real invitation for us too, to think about these religious connotations with our food system and how we produce our food in a more holistic and sustainable way.
Wow. Thank you for a beautiful image of the North Star, like you said, and the interconnection between all of this. It's really powerful. So as we come to towards the end of our time together, I just kind of want to leave space for if there's anything that we kind of didn't get to in our conversation yet that you'd like to speak to.
I think for me, it's been a great conversation and being able to reflect on this because I'm so focused on the corporate world of how do we help these companies find more humane chicken, for example. It's been a really good opportunity for me to reflect and think about how I started this journey and how I can use my voice and how others can be inspired to use their voice to really speak power, or excuse me, speak truth to power and really be able to be the voice for the voiceless. That's what we're called to be when it comes to living our faith out loud. And that's something that's really important to me. So I would encourage anyone that's listening to think about how do you redefine your neighbor and how can we think differently about the animals raised for meat, dairy, and eggs in our food system, and think about the religious connotations and implications of when we eat our food, that it should be a more meditative spiritual practice of death becoming life and the deep connection that we have to Christ because of that, and the notions of really having the opportunity to reform our food system every time we eat. It's a really powerful, and it's kind of like a silent revolution in a way because you're at home, but it really does make a huge difference. And so I guess that would be kind of my final notion to think about how do we redefine our neighbor and the power of the consumer and all of us as people of faith, that we can really choose the kind of food system that we want.
Thank you so much for like posing those powerful questions and for calling each of us into this. It's really I'm inspired, and there's like just thank you for being this a beacon of hope in a time when we so need it. So thank you so much for talking with me and for your work in the world. So
Yeah, thank you, Tali. And I
um,
also just want to really thank the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology for really connecting me, not only to you, but to the network of people out there that are really connecting this important issue together, that this isn't one or the other, but this really is a call for people of faith to make a real change for the world that we live in. So I'm really grateful to all of the faculty and staff at Yale as well for putting this together and really paving the way for people like me to study and take courses on this and then to go out in the world and try and make some change.